All right, folks. I'm Austin Davenport. I am born and raised here in Austin, Texas. And I'm here to talk to you today about tomatoes. I love growing tomatoes. I know everybody who is a vegetable gardener in Texas loves flexing tomatoes. So we'll get you there. We'll get you caught up to speed. I brought about 20 or so that need a new home, so please do see me after class. All right. So, the basics. What do I have here? Oh, I always advise you to grow what you want to eat, not what you want to grow. A bunch of people are like, cucamelons, this seems cool. I grow it, I have a bunch of cucamelons, I don't know what to do with cucamelons, and then they go bad. So please think about what recipes excite you. Do you want to make salsas? Do you want to make tomato pastes? Do you really enjoy salads? These are the things I want you to think about before you put a tomato plant in the ground. Do you want a bunch of BLTs? Do you enjoy a tomato sandwich? Well, then you're going to want a beefsteak or a slicer tomato. Means the same thing. Do you really enjoy salads? You're going to want to go with cherry tomatoes. They're very sweet. They're very juicy. They're very prolific. If you want the most amount of success possible with the least amount of risk, I would highly recommend you go with a grape tomato or a cherry tomato. The smaller tomato you go with, the better your success. That's just a general rule of thumb. And then we have long tomatoes, which are going to be a lot more fleshy, and that's where you get a lot more tomato flavor for making your pasta sauces, your salsas, all that sort of stuff. So think about, what do I want to eat, not what do I want to grow. All right. So tomato plants are tropical plants. These plants die as soon as it is freezing temperatures outside. So a bunch of people were planting their tomatoes in February this year, and I was really, really hoping that a frost would come by and ruin their day. Because I don't appreciate people who think they are gods in the garden. I like garden stewards. I don't like garden gods. So tomato plants will die in the frost, and they will suffer in extreme temperatures. And for these reasons, we want to grow these things very efficiently, very effectively, and we want to guide that growth. We want to be very deliberate. We want to be very hands-on. I don't want to put my tomato in the ground and just leave it there. I want to be there, and I want to sculpt the perfect conditions, because we are growing in an era of climate change. When I was a kid, it used to be about 10, 11 days of triple-digit weather. Last year, it was 78, and tomatoes will suffer as soon as it is triple-digit weather for about 2 days. So just keep that in mind. We have a deadline. We're trying to get in, grow this plant effectively, get it to a mature size, get it to give us a bunch of food, and get out before we all get sunburnt, us and the plants. All right. A tomato plant is going to want about 7 hours at least of sunlight, probably more, closer to 12, but 7 to 12 is a general rule of thumb for anything that produces a fruit. You think about your zucchinis, fruit plants, or anything that produces tomatoes and stuff like that. At least 7 hours a day, preferably morning sun. It's a lot softer, it's a lot more gentle. Afternoon sun is a lot more harsh. It's going to hurt the plants a little bit more, but it's okay if your space only has afternoon sun. I just want you to get to know the context of the growing spaces you're in and realize, hey, I have only afternoon sun. I might want to get a shade cloth. I might want to water a little bit more, and I want to expect plants that are a little bit more stressed out. It's just a general rule of thumb. Just know your context. All right. A tomato is a very, very greedy plant. It wants as much soil as you can give it. If you're growing in a raised bed, you want to give it at least 12 inches of soil. Same thing with pots. You want 12 inches of soil. If you're growing in a pot, one tomato plant wants about 7 gallons at the very least. That's the smallest amount you can get away with, but a tomato plant wants to go all the way to China. They want it all. Right. Cool. And if you're just growing in a vegetable garden, space them about 2 to 3 feet apart. That gives them plenty of room so they're not competing for resources, and they're just having a nice time and not bullying each other. Planting. All right, I'm going to advise that you bury about 90% of your tomato plant. I have a leggy little guy, so I grow these all myself. I'm trying to give them away. I grew about 200 of these things, and I realized I don't need 200 of these things. So please do see me if you want to adopt one of these things. There are special cells all along this stem that when they realize they're buried will turn into roots, and the bigger your root structure is when you start at planting, the faster it'll grow, the faster it'll be able to intake nutrients with the most robust root system. So what I'm going to do is advise that you take off these bottom 2 leaves and plant it that deep in the ground. This is about 20 inches we're going to put in the ground, and that is all going to turn into a robust root system, and this will get your plant growing a lot faster. I planted my tomatoes on maybe March 14th or something like that, probably a week, probably like 3 weeks or something after everybody else planted, and my plants are already taller because I buried all of that tomato. I put it all in the ground, and it started shooting up way faster than everybody else's. I also guided it very productively. I wasn't babying it. I was just being very attentive, because tomatoes do not grow vertically, nature. They want to grow horizontally, sprawl out, get diseased, shoot a bunch of tomato seeds everywhere, and then die. But when we're growing them vertically, when we're growing them for tomatoes, it's a very unnatural process. All right. There's a few things we want to remove as we're guiding that tomato to maturity. The very first thing we want to take off is what are called suckers, and I have a little visual aid here. This lady is pointing to a sucker, which is always going to grow out of the armpit between a stem and a side stem. This is basically a new tomato plant growing off of your tomato, and this is going to lead to a very chaotic canopy. Tomato plants will get very diseased very quickly if you let these things develop, and you want to be checking in on your plants. I'm pinching these off. I check on my garden twice a day, once as the day's starting and once as the day's finishing. Get your green time, put the screens down. I also like to remove any sort of shaded leaves. My tomatoes have pretty much bare stems, the bottom like 9-10 inches or so. And if you look up, Google image search, what a tomato farm looks like, you will also see that their stems are bare from a foot above the ground. And that's very deliberate, because anything that would be down there is going to get too shaded out, and shaded leaves won't photosynthesize. They'll just sap energy instead of providing any. I also, this is the really sad part, I need you to take off any fruits or flowers that are developing from your tomato plant before they reach maturity. Now, I got a little visual aid with me. I put my tomato plant in the ground. I put it about 20 inches in the ground. I only got 2 inches off the ground. From this, I'm really gonna focus on productive green growth. I'm gonna feed it some nitrogen-based fertilizers. I'm going to be pinching off suckers. I'm going to be pinching off flowers until it gets to this height. I need it to be about 5'5" before I even think about letting a flower develop on there. And I kind of liken this to putting together a factory. You don't want to start producing the products in a factory before the factory is finished being built. It will do both those processes really poorly. A plant only has so much energy to allocate to any one process. So you want to be very productive. You want to be very intentional with guiding your plants to the goals you have. And again, we are racing against time. It is middle of July, and then we are out. And I want to get you 50 pounds of tomatoes from about 3 plants before we get there. If I let a tomato flower, when it's this tall, start to develop that fruit, I'm sacrificing tens of pounds of fruit. It's like more in the bush are worth more than the hand, in that sort of analogy. So I need you to realize that if you let tomatoes go before they reach maturity, you are sacrificing a lot in the long run. I grow about 100 pounds of tomatoes with about 5 plants in a year, and I do that because I'm very deliberate. I don't garden my garden, I farm my garden, and I want to tell you how to get the most amount of production possible so you know where the end of that spectrum is, and then you can kind of place yourself, well, maybe I do want to let that one tomato flower go. And I want you to realize what you're sacrificing for that if you want to let that happen. But if you want the most amount of tomatoes possible, you got to follow my lead and pinch that thing off before it gets to full maturity. Okay. There I am. We're waiting.
While you're waiting, what do you do about the squirrel menace?
The squirrel menace. Okay, this is a great topic. Big squirrel night, guys. Squirrels and other things that will take a bite out of your tomatoes, poke a hole in your tomatoes. I typically find those are animals looking for a little bit of water. They're not looking for food, they're looking for a water source. When it gets to late May, about the times our tomatoes are starting to be ready, our water sources are dried up. The creeks are dry. Every like place that used to be a creek is now a development. So all these birds and critters are looking for some sort of water. And if you put out a little bird bath or a little bit of fountain or anything that's a water source in your yard, they won't bother your tomatoes. You can also do a little like conditioning trick where you can put some Christmas ornaments on your tomato plant, and then bugs and critters will be like, "What's this?" Mess with it, realize it's not for them, and then when your tomatoes do ripen, you're good. All right. So, we're also pruning so that we can keep our plants healthy. Tomato plants have been babied and spoiled for about 2 millennia now, and they rely on you to make sure that they're in good health. We want to avoid any sort of stems clumping up together, trapping moisture, and starting to harbor things like disease and molds and stuff like that. And if you see stems rubbing up against each other, they're creating open wounds, and you want to minimize that. We want to keep our plants healthy to keep them more productive. A healthy plant will produce a lot more than a sick plant, but a sick plant will also still produce. That's all I had there. Fertilizing and maturity. So I typically fertilize every 2 weeks after planting, after 2 weeks from the planting day. So I put my tomato in the ground. I realize right now I need to focus on root growth. So I'm going to provide it with my handy dandy Bush Doctor root drench here that you can find at a lot of places. Go to your local hydroponic store. I'm a big fan of the local hydroponic store. There's 2 of them. There's one in North Austin, one in South Austin. Bright ideas. Tell them I sent you. It's like a candy store for gardeners. You can also find this stuff at some HEBs, those big ones that have like the Texas Garden Center out front that is really, really enticing to me, and now I have to get my groceries curbside because I'll blow all my money in the garden center. I think I've also found all of these at like Planet K, if you're into that. Every one of these has an NPK value: nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium. Those are your macronutrients. There's a few more macronutrients, but those are the most important. So when I first put my tomato plant in the ground, I'm focusing on that root growth. I want to encourage those roots. I'll hit it with the root drench and really robustly encourage root growth, so that way the plant can grow faster, more effectively, and come up to speed that much quicker. Next thing I want to do is focus on vegetative growth, which I'll switch to using a high nitrogen fertilizer, which I have over here. This sucker is called Holy Mackerel. I splash this on myself once a week or so, not intentionally, just always happens. This is a 310, and that first number is my nitrogen. It's the highest number in the value, which means it's a nitrogen-based fertilizer. This is just a bunch of fish ground up into a pulp, and I apply this to my root zone so that I can give the plants more nitrogen. Nitrogen is anything that is leafy green growth, folks. So if it's green, it's requiring some nitrogen. Now I want to grab my nitrogen-based fertilizer, provide that to the plant, and get it to maturity quickly and effectively. I'm not trying to provide it with anything that gives it anything else. I just want leafy green growth. After about, a month and a half of feeding it mostly a nitrogen-based fertilizer, I got it 5 feet tall, 5 inches tall. Now I can start to do the good stuff. I can start to provide myself with those fruits and flowers, stop pinching them off, and actually start to encourage them with a high phosphorus fertilizer. I have here my favorite, which is the Fox Farm Grow Big liquid plant food. This thing is a 644, so it's got everything. It's going to provide me with a little bit more nitrogen, a lot of phosphorus, and a lot of potassium. All right, nitrogen, leafy green growth. Phosphorus is fruits and flowers, and then potassium is general plant health and root system. So you want kind of a little bit of everything, but you want the biggest number focused on what the specific goal you have in mind right now. That's all I really had about fertilizing. Cool. Oh, I also usually will throw a bit of like slow release organic fertilizer in the hole when I put my tomato plants in. I really enjoy this stuff, Microlife. I primarily only use organic fertilizers. I don't go to the big box stores. Those are for landscapers. Go to your local nurseries. Go to the hydroponic stores. Those are for gardeners. If you do use inorganic fertilizers, if you do have like a 40-40-40 or something like that, just realize that that stuff is heavy-handed and it will most likely wash into the waterways. If you've been on a bridge lately and you see just a giant amount of algae or whatever blooming in the lakes, that is someone spraying an inorganic fertilizer on their lawns, on their golf courses, or whatever, and that stuff leaches into the waterways and starts to suffocate the fish. I highly recommend you only use organic fertilizers, but that's just me on a soapbox. These are my personal favorites. I believe it's mostly what I have here are my all-star. I always grow 100 pounds of tomatoes easy in one vegetable bed, not even two, not three, not my whole garden, but one vegetable bed. I can get 100 pounds of tomatoes within a year, and I use that through my Black Krim Superstar. I love these for flavor. I love them for productivity. I just love them, and they look great too. These are a slicer tomato. They're kind of small in size. I have been that one guy who was like, I want to grow the biggest tomato in town. I was fostering this 3-pound tomato, and of course, nature humbled me. It came by, a squirrel took a bite out of it, and I wanted to give up. I didn't want to tell anybody I was gardening. I didn't want to garden anymore. I wanted to leave it all behind me. Yes, the squirrel menace. So, just realize if you're trying to be if you're trying to flex on the gram, your highest pounding tomato, there will be a squirrel that will humble you as well. Next up, I have the Juliette tomato. This is a really productive tomato that me and a lot of my friends here around have seen produce so well, regardless if they're really diseased, regardless if it's way too cold, regardless if it's way too hot, this tomato does not frickin' care. And it's great. You can use it kind of like a long tomato or a grape tomato. It's kind of in between those two. So if you want to do a lot of cooking with it, if you want to do a lot of salads with it, if you want to ignore your garden, and if you want to be the worst tomato grower possible with the best results, get the Juliette. The last tomato I have here is called the Sun Gold tomato, and this tomato is famous for never making it into the kitchen. It is always eaten right off the plant because you won't be able to resist. Every nursery should have these. You should be able to find these. I don't have them with me personally today because I already know, hey, I don't want to compete with the nurseries. But there's plenty of other tomatoes. Typically, I recommend going with like a hybrid tomato if it's your first time growing tomatoes. Some people will tell you to grow only heirloom tomatoes, but heirloom tomatoes can be a little bit less productive, a little bit more disease prone, and a little bit slower to grow. So I just tell you, hey, just figure out what works best for you, what works best for your context. I teach a lot of plant cultivation, a lot of food cultivation, and all its many facets. And before you go really deep down the rabbit hole with the most obscure, weird, purpley, golden-looking tomato, I suggest just go with a classic one, go with a staple, go with one that is like really, really well-farmed and reliable. Go with the reliable variety, and then next year you can go crazy with like Romanesco or something. But I just ran right through everything. I always give away my presentations at the end of my presentations. I do about 5 to 9 of these a month, and I'm super open source. I have spent so many hours researching these things that I just feel I need to give that information away. I don't want people doing the work twice. So please do take this presentation home with you, and I hope to see you at another event of mine soon. I am one of the many leaders of the Austin Organic Gardeners. We meet the second Monday of the month and the second Saturday of the month at Zilker Botanical Gardens. I will be there doing the events next month for both of those. And last month, we had the Central Texas Cherokee Township Nation out, teaching us about Three Sisters, teaching us about indigenous practices when it comes to gardening. So I hope I see you there. I also host a monthly gardening program at the House and Branch Library in Central Austin on the west side, where I talk about something different every month, whether it's stewarding migrations, whether it's composting. Next month on the 21st, I believe it is, where we always meet the third Tuesday of the month. I'm talking teas. I'm talking how to grow your own tea, and I'm talking everything. I'm probably going to list about 40 different plants, a lot of things you didn't realize were tea. I have a lot of things in my dehydrator right now that I'm going to serve up on that night. And then I'm also one of the leaders of the Central Texas Mycological Society, where it is our mission to get you connected to the natural world around you through the avenue of fungi. We go out on nature walks. We get that green time. We even go out in the dark and see what's glowing in the dark. So I hope to see you at many of those events as well. And I just kind of sped right through everything, so hopefully we can get you out of here at a good time. Let's get these questions.
That was outstanding. Oh my God. All right, y'all. So I see a hand up already. This is an auspicious start. Let's do this. What you got?
Hi. So, why are so many types of tomatoes named after either sinister pirate captains or serial killers?
I love this question. I have not heard of a serial killer tomato. Oh. Mm. It does sound very intimidating. I will say that, like, it used, yeah. A lot of people would name a plant off of like a person or an event or something, as opposed to trying to give it more of like a natural or more like botanically sound name. But we have also lost about over 70% of our seed diversity in America. It used to be you used to have a family bean. You used to have a family beet. We all used to have some sort of, this is my family's heirloom plant. And we need that now more than ever. We need people getting into gardening, getting into plant breeding, and naming their plants after serial killers. Yes, sir.
Hi. So when I was growing up, and at my dad's uncle's farm and his garden and stuff, in the Texas, he would lay hay out, and they would have holes for each of the plants to come through. And is that something that you do, and can that get us through the summer?
Yeah, so this is more of like a mulching question. Typically, if you have about 5 inches to 6 inches of mulch, which is a lot of freaking mulch, your plants will be the most happy because that's insulating the ground temperature. The ground temperature will be about 55 to 65 degrees instead of 100 degrees, which is up above the ground. And especially if you're mulching, you're also trapping in that moisture, so you need to water way less. So if you do garden in the ground or in a raised bed or in a pot, I highly recommend you put a lot of mulch on there. Hay is great, straw is great. I am using pine needles right now because I really enjoy that they don't break down. Hardwood mulch is perfect, but here in Central Texas, I find that like more organic based mulches like straw or hardwood mulch, it breaks down so fast, I gotta remulch in a season. So I'm using some pine needles. Definitely mulch your plants.
All right. What you got?
Thank you. So, a few years ago, I got a house and I was thinking about doing a garden. And then every time I have a friend who does plants and stuff come over and look, they say, yeah, you've got this big, huge tree here, so you get no shade. You can't grow anything. The grass in my backyard is currently like 2 feet tall. So obviously there's something there to help things grow. What would you recommend for like if you do have like a place where you want to grow stuff, but you really don't get any direct sunlight?
I love this question. I always recommend that people conduct a light survey. Light interacting with your garden is going to be one of the biggest factors that can determine what you can grow with success and what will be a big uphill battle. Take a sunny day here in the spring, come out at 7 a.m., take a photo of where you want to garden or where you think you want to garden. Come back at noon, take another photo. Come back at 3, take another photo. And then again at 7, take another photo. And we want to think about how many hours of light is this getting? When is it getting shade? Is it mostly morning light? Is it mostly afternoon light? Is it coming from the south? Is it really happy that day? I don't know. So do you really want to be able to like know these numbers? It's not about following somebody on Instagram who's like a garden god or whatever. It's about conquering your context. So I highly encourage you to do a light survey and know exactly how light interacts with the space you're cultivating in. My community garden gets about 8 hours of sunlight, mostly in the morning, which is perfect. And then I have a giant tree that somebody who is a plant nerd coming by and be like, oh, you're growing under a tree, you're screwed. I'm like, no, sir, this is only shaded in the afternoon. I get tons of morning light, so I'm good. I put my tomatoes there, and I'm fine, which is just like that finer detail. I love that, like, when it comes to vegetable gardening, you will ask 3 different seasoned vegetable gardeners a question and get 5 different answers. Again, the real meat and potatoes, the devil in the details is your context. Get to know your context, master your context, and transfer knowledge that someone else has in a completely different context to yours. That's really what's going to get you growing successfully. Thank you.
Awesome question. I think we have time for one or two more. I see one here, and then I have one myself.
Yeah. So, is there any point in trying to keep my tomatoes alive over the summer? I mean, I know if they survive the summer, I can get a second harvest, say around September or October, but then it gets cold, and I end up pulling a lot of green tomatoes off and hoping they ripen indoors, which they will, but they're not as great. Is there anything, is it much more worthwhile when I get to, I don't know, June or July, to start looking at removing my tomatoes and putting in more heat-resistant ones?
Mm-hmm.
Or should I baby them through with shade cloth and drip irrigation and prayers and candles and good thoughts and hope that I get more tomatoes in September?
Yes. So when we hit triple-digit weather, I put all this work in. I fertilized. I'm out there with my plants like 5-10 minutes a day, times however many times, plus like months and stuff and like that. And like, oh, I have so much invested in this tomato plant, and now it's triple-digit weather. It's gonna suck. It might kill that tomato. It might disease that tomato. I could put it on life support. I could give it a shade cloth. I could mulch it 6 inches. I could keep it watered to kind of keep it through and survive to better days. Because when it's September, you can plant again and restart this whole process, which is what I recommend. We're gonna plant now, grow efficiently, grow productively, get to summer, get out. When temperatures come back down, replant, do the same process, be very efficiently, be very productive and present with your guiding your tomato towards production, and then have tomatoes from Halloween to New Year's essentially, because our first frost doesn't come around till typically New Year's or after. So you can be in the middle of January harvesting tomatoes and flexing them on your friends. I do recommend that you, when it's about to be that awful, awful summertime, let some of your suckers develop, get to about 6 to 9, 10 inches, cut them off, put them in some water, and baby those plants indoors, and put them in a little bit of soil, and then you'll have a replacement to repot and replant. If you want to try to keep your tomatoes alive through the summer, you can. If you're in like Wimberley or in one of these smaller towns, a water restriction will hit you like a bat to the face, and your neighbor will be tattletaling on you to the water authorities that like, hey, this guy's got his plants going and we need to stop that. I don't appreciate that fibbing, and I know that the city of Austin wastes way more water than they should be bothering you to restrict planting and watering in your garden. It's kind of like a, hey, hedge your bets. I always recommend grab some suckers, let them go, and bring them indoors during those hot temperatures. Tomatoes will not produce a tomato if it is 70 degrees at night, and it will be 70 degrees at night for every day that it is 100 degrees during the day.
All right, so I want to pull rank a little bit and have the last question. What do you make with these 50 pounds of tomatoes? Like, what happens to them?
Yeah, so I get the most amount of production possible, and I get really freaking sick, because if you're really good at vegetable gardening, you will be absolutely loaded. You will have no longer a problem of scarcity, but a problem of abundance. And when I have just buckets and buckets of tomatoes, I'm knocking on neighbors' doors. I'm bringing them to work. I'm like, please get these off of my hands. But I want you to think about, what should I do for that contingency? How will I handle that overwhelming abundance? Am I just gonna have a big cooking day? Am I gonna go to a communal kitchen? Am I gonna get some friends involved? Think about what you wanna do. This is gonna be a little bit weird, but I don't really care that much about my end harvests. My harvests are means to an ends. We all love one specific thing when it comes to vegetable gardening. Some people are like, I really love beets. Some people are like, I really love tomatoes. When it comes to me, I really love gardening gardeners. That's my harvest. That's what I look forward to. So the tomatoes, it's all gravy. It's all like, I'm just giving it away and trying to inspire someone that I randomly met and gave a tomato to and said, hey, it's not that hard. You could do it too, and get them to grow it. So that's kind of what I do when I'm overwhelmed with tomatoes.
Awesome. All right. So let's give a round of applause. That's some good stuff there. And I'm going to go ahead and say that in a few months, if you need to get rid of some tomatoes, you're welcome to bring them here on the final Thursday of the month. We'll have a Nerd Night tomato thing. With that being said, I do believe you have some plants to give away for people who might want to try to put your advice into action.